Tonight, we explore what happens when the places we trust to protect us become the places that trap us. Death leaves echoes, and sometimes those echoes are captured in stone. Before we begin, these horror stories, horror that crawls under your skin and lingers. So if you enjoy content like this, consider subscribing. It helps me bring you more stories like this. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and what is the current time there. Now, let me tell you about Matthew Chen, and how he learned that some buildings never forget. I worked as a security guard at St. Catherine's Hospital from 2017 until 2019. It was supposed to be a temporary position while I finished my degree in criminal justice. Instead, it became the reason I dropped out entirely. This is why I am sharing my experience now, 3 years later, because I need people to understand that what happened in that basement was not just in my head, even though part of me still wishes it was. St. Catherine's was a mid-sized regional hospital in western Pennsylvania, built in 1947 on the site of what used to be a tuberculosis sanatorium. The original building from the 1800s still formed part of the basement level, where they had converted the old isolation wards into storage rooms and maintenance areas. My shift ran from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., patrolling the entire property every 2 hours, which meant I had to walk through every floor, including the basement. The basement was always busy during the day. Maintenance crews, hospital engineers, delivery personnel. They all used those corridors constantly. But after 8 p.m., it emptied out completely. The fluorescent lights would hum in that particular way that makes your teeth ache, and your footsteps echoed differently down there, like the walls were listening. I noticed it on my first night, that peculiar acoustic quality, but I chalked it up to old architecture and concrete walls. Strange incidents began almost immediately, though I dismissed them at first. I would hear footsteps or distant voices with no one around. Fire doors that I knew I had propped open would swing shut behind me. Equipment would be moved from where maintenance had left it. Small things. Things I could rationalize. The night custodian, Margaret, had been working there for 23 years. When I mentioned the odd occurrences to her during my second week, she just looked at me with this tired expression and said, "You work near the old morgue section, you hear things. That is just how it is down there." But I had not mentioned the morgue to her. I did not even know there was a morgue section. She explained that the original sanatorium had a morgue in the basement, built during the tuberculosis epidemic when they were processing dozens of bodies every month. The modern hospital had moved their morgue to a different wing in the 1970s, but the old cold storage rooms were still down there, repurposed as general storage. The section she was referring to was at the far eastern end of the basement, past the boiler room, in the oldest part of the structure. "Nobody likes going down there," Margaret said, emptying her mop bucket into the utility sink. "Even the maintenance guys avoid it if they can. There is just something wrong with the air in that section." The air. She was right about that. When you walked past the boiler room and into the older section, the temperature would drop by at least 10 degrees. But, more than that, the air felt heavier, denser, like you were walking into water. Your ears would pop slightly, and every sound became muffled and strange. I started keeping a small notebook in my jacket pocket, documenting the incidents. I cannot explain why I did this. Maybe some remnant of my criminal justice training. Maybe just a need to prove to myself that these things were actually happening. By the end of my first month, I had recorded 27 separate occurrences. Footsteps when I was alone. Voices that seemed to come from empty rooms. The sensation of being watched. Doors opening on their own. Cold spots that appeared and disappeared. On a Tuesday night in October, 6 weeks into the job, I had the most terrifying encounter of my life. It was 11:43 p.m. I remember the exact time because I checked my watch just before turning the corner. I was doing my third patrol of the night, walking through the old morgue section. The hospital was particularly quiet that night, one of those autumn evenings where even the emergency room was slow. My footsteps echoed off the concrete walls as I followed my usual route, checking that all the storage room doors were secure. There was a mirror mounted at the end of one corridor, one of those large convex security mirrors installed to help you see around blind corners. I had passed this mirror hundreds of times. It was part of my routine. Check the mirror, turn the corner, continue the patrol. Simple. Mechanical. Safe. But that night, when I checked the mirror, I froze. Standing just around the corner, precisely where I could not see it directly, but could see its reflection perfectly, was a human-shaped black mass. It was not a shadow cast by something else. It was not a person in dark clothing. It was a figure, roughly 6 feet tall, absolutely black, darker than the surrounding darkness, with no features, no texture, nothing. Just a human silhouette, cut out of reality itself. I could not move. Every muscle in my body locked. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. In the mirror, I watched this thing just standing there, motionless, positioned exactly where it would be hidden from my direct line of sight, but visible in the reflection. It was as if it knew the mirror was there, as if it understood how I patrolled. I do not know how long I stood there. It could have been 10 seconds or 10 minutes. Time did a strange thing in that moment, stretching out and compressing simultaneously. I could hear my own breathing, rapid and shallow. I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. I could hear a pipe dripping somewhere in the distance. But I could not move. Then it moved. The figure turned, slowly, deliberately, and began walking away in the opposite direction, down the corridor that led deeper into the old morgue section. Not toward me, but away. It did not run. It did not vanish. It simply walked, with a smooth gliding motion that was almost but not quite human, and disappeared into the darkness at the far end of the hall. When I finally gathered enough courage to look around the corner, there was nothing there. The corridor was empty, but I could feel the cold, that bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with temperature, lingering in the air like smoke. I did not complete my patrol that night. I went back upstairs, filed a brief report claiming I felt unwell, and sat in the security office until my shift ended, watching the camera feeds with the lights on. The basement cameras showed nothing unusual, just empty corridors and shadows cast by fluorescent lights. But I knew what I had seen. The next day, I spoke with Derek, one of the senior guards who had been working at St. Catherine's for almost 15 years. I expected him to laugh at me or suggest I get more sleep. Instead, he nodded slowly and asked me, "Did you see it in the mirror?" I nodded. "Near the old cold storage rooms?" I nodded again. Derek leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. "Yeah, that is the spot. I have seen it 3 times in the past decade. Always in the mirror. Never directly. Matthew, I am going to tell you something, and you can believe it or not, but I have worked here long enough to know this building has memories." He explained something called the stone tape theory. The idea that traumatic events could somehow be imprinted on the physical environment, particularly on stone and other crystalline materials, like a recording that could replay under certain conditions. The hospital had been built on a site with an enormous amount of death and suffering. Hundreds of tuberculosis patients in the 1800s. Dozens of other deaths in the decades since. All that trauma, all that fear and pain, supposedly absorbed by the limestone walls and concrete foundations. Some researchers think that places can record emotional energy, Derek said, pulling out a worn paperback book from his desk drawer, especially during moments of intense trauma or death. The building becomes a kind of, I do not know, a storage medium. And under certain conditions, usually when someone sensitive walks through, that recording plays back. I did not know what to think. It sounded like pseudoscience, like the kind of thing you would read on a paranormal website. But I could not deny what I had seen. That figure in the mirror was not my imagination. It was not a trick of the light. It was something else, something that did not follow the normal rules. Derek told me that other guards had reported similar experiences. Always in the same section. Always the same basic figure, a humanoid shadow that appeared in mirrors or peripheral vision, but never directly. Some had heard voices down there, fragments of conversations in languages that might have been German or Italian, the languages of the immigrant patients who died in the sanatorium. Others reported feeling hands touching them, though nothing was there. The official policy is that we do not talk about it, Derek said. Management does not want staff or patients getting spooked. But unofficially, most of us who have worked here long enough know that section is, well, active. I asked him if anyone had ever tried to investigate it properly, with equipment or experts. He shook his head. A few years back, some paranormal investigators wanted to do a study. The hospital administration shut it down fast. Bad publicity. But one of the investigators told me something interesting before they left. She said that hospitals, especially old ones built on sites with previous medical facilities, are perfect environments for what she called residual hauntings. All that emotion, all that death, it leaves an imprint. And certain people can perceive those imprints, usually people who are tired, stressed, or emotionally vulnerable. That last part stuck with me because I had been all three that night. Final exams were approaching. I had been pulling double shifts to save money. My girlfriend and I had just broken up. Maybe I was more receptive to whatever was down there in that basement. Maybe my defenses were lower. But that did not explain what I saw in the mirror. I continued working at St. Catherine's for another 14 months, but I never went back to that section alone. When I had to patrol the basement, I would radio for another guard to accompany me, citing safety protocols. Most of them understood without me having to explain. A few times when I was forced to go through that area alone, I would walk quickly with my eyes forward, refusing to look at the mirrors, refusing to acknowledge the cold spots or the sounds of footsteps that followed just slightly behind me. Other incidents occurred during those months. More footsteps. More voices. Twice I heard what sounded like someone crying in one of the storage rooms, but when I opened the door, there was nothing inside except old furniture and medical equipment. Once, I felt a hand on my shoulder when I was standing in an empty corridor. I spun around so fast I almost fell, but there was no one there, just the empty hallway and the sound of my own panicked breathing. The worst incident happened in February of 2019. I was doing a routine patrol around 2 a.m. when all the lights in the basement section went out simultaneously. Complete darkness. Not just a blown fuse or a tripped breaker, but every light in a 50-meter stretch of corridor going dark at once. I pulled out my flashlight and started walking toward the electrical panel, and as I moved, I heard it. Dozens of voices, all speaking at once, layered over each other like a radio scanning through stations. Some were speaking English. Others were in languages I did not recognize. Men, women, children, all of them sounding frightened or in pain. The voices were not coming from any specific location. They were coming from everywhere, from the walls themselves, growing louder and more desperate as I moved through the darkness. I ran. I am not ashamed to admit it. I ran back to the stairs and did not stop until I was on the ground floor with multiple locked doors between me and that basement. When maintenance came to check the electrical system 20 minutes later, they found nothing wrong. All the lights were functioning normally. The breakers had not tripped. There was no explanation for the blackout. I gave my notice the next day. 2 weeks later, I was working security at a shopping mall, and I've never stepped foot in another hospital basement. St. Catherine's eventually hired my replacement, a young woman named Rachel, who lasted exactly 3 weeks before she also quit. I heard through Derek that she reported similar experiences. The figure in the mirror. The voices. The overwhelming sense of being watched. Some researchers who study paranormal phenomena believe that certain locations can absorb and replay traumatic events, like a tape recorder made of stone and fear. The stone tape theory suggests that limestone, quartz, and other crystalline materials found in building foundations can somehow encode emotional energy from intense experiences. Death, suffering, terror, all of it captured and preserved in the molecular structure of the building itself. If that is true, then St. Catherine's Hospital is playing back decades of recorded trauma every night. Hundreds of people died in that basement over the past century and a half. Tuberculosis patients in the old sanatorium. Accident victims and terminal patients in the modern hospital. All of them leaving some trace of themselves behind. Some echo that persists long after the body is gone. I still think about that figure in the mirror. The way it stood there, perfectly positioned just out of direct sight. The way it moved, gliding rather than walking, as if it was not quite bound by the same physics as the rest of us. And I wonder if it was some kind of recording, a traumatic moment replaying itself over and over, or if it was something else. Something that knew I was there and was watching me just as intently as I was watching it. To this day, I still double-check every corner mirror and jump at unexpected sounds. I avoid hospital basements entirely. Friends ask me why I dropped out of criminal justice, why I changed career paths so suddenly. I tell them it was not a good fit, that I wanted something different. But the truth is, I left because I learned something that my professors never taught me. Some buildings never forget, and sometimes, when you walk through their darkest corridors, they remind you that death leaves more than just bodies behind. It leaves impressions, recordings, echoes that replay themselves in mirrors and shadows, and cold spots that appear in empty hallways. And if you are unlucky enough, if you are tired enough or vulnerable enough, you become part of the audience for a show that has been playing for over 100 years. I transferred to a different career. I work office security now, in a modern building with no basement, lots of windows, and a construction date of 2012. Nothing older than 15 years. Nothing with a history of suffering. I tell people it is because the pay is better, which is true, but that is not the real reason. The real reason is that I do not ever want to see that figure in a mirror again. I do not want to hear those voices coming from the walls. I do not want to stand in a corridor and feel the overwhelming certainty that something is standing just behind me, just out of sight, watching and waiting and replaying some terrible moment that happened before I was born. St. Catherine's Hospital is still operating. The basement is still there, and the old morgue section still exists, repurposed and painted over, but never quite cleaned of what happened there. New security guards patrol those corridors every night. And if they are like me, if they are tired enough or stressed enough or simply unlucky enough, they will eventually see what I saw. They will look in a mirror and see something that should not exist. And they will understand why some of us choose to work anywhere else. I still have that notebook where I documented the incidents. 27 separate occurrences in the first month alone. I have never shown it to anyone. I keep it in a drawer at home, and sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, I flip through those pages and read my own handwriting describing things that I still cannot fully explain. The footsteps that followed me. The voices that came from empty rooms. The figure in the mirror. The cold that had nothing to do with temperature. And I wonder if those recordings are still playing, every night, in that basement where too many people died and not enough people remember. I wonder if the building itself remembers, if stone and concrete and limestone can hold memory the way human brains do, preserving every scream and every last breath in their molecular structure. I do not know if the stone tape theory is real. I do not know if buildings can record trauma and play it back like some kind of architectural haunting. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that I will never work in a hospital basement again. Some places should be left alone. Some recordings should not be played. And some buildings should be torn down and rebuilt, because whatever is stored in their foundations is not something the living should have to witness. That is what I learned, working at St. Catherine's Hospital. That is why I quit. And that is why, 3 years later, I still check every mirror before I turn a corner. Still avoid hospital basements, and still wake up sometimes at 2 a.m. with a sensation that something is standing just behind me, watching, waiting, replaying a moment of death that happened long before I was born. The basement is still there. The recordings are still playing. And somewhere in the darkness of the old morgue section, that figure is still standing just around the corner, visible only in mirrors, waiting for the next tired security guard to walk past and see what I saw. I hope whoever replaced me at St. Catherine's is stronger than I was. I hope they do not see the figure in the mirror. But if they do, I hope they run faster than I did. Because some things you see in hospital basements, you can never forget. No matter how hard you try, no matter how many years pass. They stay with you, like recordings that play in your mind long after you have left the building, long after you have changed careers, long after you have convinced yourself that it was all just stress and exhaustion and shadows. But it was not shadows. It was something else. Something that hospitals know and security guards learn in buildings remember. Tonight, we explore what happens when the boundaries between care and cruelty dissolve in the shadows of an understaffed nursing facility. Now, let me tell you about what I witnessed during my first year as a nursing aide, and why I can never work in memory care again. This happened to me when I was 22 years old. I had just finished my vocational nursing course and landed what I thought was a dream position at Grantham Assisted Living, a small memory care facility about 40 minutes outside of Boston. The pay was decent for entry-level work, and the orientation nurse assured me that most of our residents were gentle souls who just needed a little extra help remembering to take their medications or finding their way back to their rooms at night. I don't believe in anything supernatural. I studied biology in college before switching to nursing. I understand how the brain works, how memory deteriorates, how dementia patients can become confused and even aggressive as their cognitive function declines. I thought I was prepared for anything I might encounter on the job. I was wrong. The facility itself was an old converted hospital building, 3 floors with a memory care unit occupying the entire second floor. There were 18 beds total on our wing, most of them occupied by patients with various forms of dementia. Alzheimer's disease mostly, but we also had a few cases of Lewy body dementia, and one patient with what the doctors called acute toxic progressive leukoencephalopathy, a terminal condition I had never heard of during my training. The hallway smelled like industrial cleaner and something else I could never quite identify, something organic and wrong that seemed to seep from the walls themselves during the night shifts. I was assigned to care for 3 patients on my first rotation. There was gentle Mr. Jones, 78 years old, with advanced Alzheimer's disease, who barely spoke anymore, but would smile when I brought him his evening medication. There was Mrs. Henderson, 83, who thought I was her daughter and cried every time I left her room. And then there was Mr. Owens. Mr. Owens was 67 years old. He had Lewy body dementia complicated by severe PTSD from his time in Vietnam. His chart listed him as a high-risk patient. He had episodes of combativeness. He wandered into other residents' rooms at night, and he had been caught twice trying to disable the security cameras in the hallways. The day shift nurse warned me about him during orientation. She told me to always check on him last, to never turn my back on him, and to call for backup if he became agitated. She also told me something else. something that made my skin prickle even then. She said that sometimes Mr. Owens was too aware. That, despite his diagnosis, there were moments when his eyes would clear, and you could see something behind them, something calculating and patient, waiting for the right moment. My first 2 weeks passed without incident. I learned the routines, memorized which residents needed help bathing and which ones could still manage on their own, figured out how to calm Mrs. Henderson when she became confused about why her daughter never visited. I got used to the sounds of the facility at night, the beeping monitors, the occasional cry from someone caught in a nightmare, the shuffle of slippered feet in the hallways as residents wandered despite our best efforts to keep them in their beds. It was on my 15th night shift that I first noticed something was wrong with Mr. Jones. When I went to help him prepare for bed at 9 p.m., I found him sitting in his chair by the window, completely still, staring at nothing. This was not unusual for dementia patients, but when I called his name, he did not respond. When I touched his shoulder, his body was rigid, every muscle tensed. His eyes were open but unfocused, and when I shined my penlight across them, his pupils did not constrict. I called for the charge nurse immediately. She examined him and frowned. His vital signs were stable. Blood pressure, normal. Heart rate, normal. Temperature, normal. But he was completely unresponsive, locked in some state that we could not identify or explain. The on-call doctor ordered a transfer to the hospital for evaluation. They ran every test they could think of. CT scans, MRIs, blood work, EEGs. Everything came back normal. No stroke, no seizures, no medical explanation for his sudden catatonic state. After 3 days, they sent him back to us with a diagnosis of advanced dementia progression and instructions to continue comfort care. Except Mr. Jones was not comfortable. When I returned to work after my 2 days off, I went to check on him in his room. He was lying in his bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. And as I stood there in the doorway, I saw something that made me stop breathing. His eyes moved. Just slightly, just enough to track my movement as I entered the room. And then they moved back to the ceiling, as if he had never looked at me at all. I told myself I was imagining things. The night shift plays tricks on you sometimes, especially when you are new. You see shadows that are not there, hear sounds that cannot be explained. I went about my duties, checking on Mrs. Henderson, making my rounds, documenting vitals and medication administration. But I could not stop thinking about Mr. Jones and the way his eyes had followed me. It was Mr. Owens who confirmed my fears. 3 nights later, I was making my evening rounds when I passed his room and heard him talking. This was not unusual. Many dementia patients talk to themselves, carrying on conversations with people who are not there, reliving memories that may or may not be real. But something about his voice made me pause outside his door. He was not confused or agitated. He was speaking clearly, calmly, in a tone I had never heard from him before. He was talking about Mr. Jones, about how interesting it was that the doctors could not figure out what was wrong, about how the human body can betray the human mind, trapping consciousness inside a prison of paralyzed flesh, about locked-in syndrome and osmotic demyelination, and all the ways a person can be aware but unable to communicate, unable to move, unable to do anything but experience every moment of their existence in silent, screaming horror. I pushed open his door. Mr. Owens was sitting on his bed, freshly showered and shaving, which was odd because he normally refused to maintain his personal hygiene. He looked up at me and smiled. It was not the confused smile of a dementia patient. It was knowing and cold. "Evening, nurse," he said. His voice was different, clearer. "Just discussing philosophy with myself. You know how it is when you cannot sleep." "Mr. Owens," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "it is past 10 p.m. You should be in bed." "Should I?" He set down his razor and turned to face me fully. Or should I be making my rounds? Checking on the other residents? Making sure everyone is comfortable? There was something in his eyes that made me back toward the door. I can help you to bed if you need assistance. Oh, I do not need assistance. He stood, and I realized for the first time how tall he was, how much physical strength he still retained despite his age and diagnosis. I am more capable than people realize. Than the doctors realize. Than you realize. He paused, tilting his head. Tell me, nurse, have you checked on Mr. Jones tonight? My stomach dropped. I turned and ran down the hallway to Mr. Jones' room, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I threw open his door and immediately smelled it. Blood. Fresh and metallic and everywhere. Mr. Jones was still in his bed, still lying in that same position with his eyes open and staring at the ceiling. But his blankets were soaked red. His wrists had been cut, deep parallel lines that went down to the bone. And on the wall above his bed, written in his blood, were 2 words. Still aware. I do not remember screaming. I do not remember calling for help, or the charge nurse running into the room, or the chaos that followed. I only remember standing there, looking at Mr. Jones, and seeing his eyes move one final time. They found me. They focused on my face. And in that moment, I understood with absolute certainty that he had been conscious for everything. Every moment since that night 15 days ago, when he had gone silent and still. He had been trapped inside his body, aware and terrified, unable to move or speak or cry for help. And someone had known. Someone had visited him in the darkness of the night shift and carved him open while he could do nothing but experience every second of his own murder. Mr. Jones died from blood loss before the ambulance arrived. The police were called. An investigation was launched. Every staff member was interviewed, fingerprinted, questioned for hours about our movements that night. Mr. Owens was interviewed as well. And I stood outside the conference room listening as he spoke to the detectives in that same clear, calm voice. He told them he had been in his room all night. He told them he had seen nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing. He told them he was just a confused old man with dementia, and how could they possibly suspect him of something so horrible? They found no evidence. No fingerprints, no DNA, no proof of any kind. The security cameras in the hallways had been disabled that night, their feeds corrupted by what the technicians called electromagnetic interference. Mr. Jones's room had no camera, as per the privacy regulations for memory care facilities. There were no witnesses except for 18 dementia patients, none of whom could provide reliable testimony. But I knew. And Mr. Owens knew that I knew. The night before I quit, I saw him in the hallway at 3 a.m. I was making my rounds, and he was standing outside Mr. Jones' room, which had been cleaned and prepared for a new resident. He looked at me and smiled, and this time he did not even pretend to be confused. The quiet ones make better victims, he said softly. They cannot tell anyone what is happening to them, cannot scream, cannot fight back. Just experience everything while the world assumes they feel nothing at all. He stepped closer to me, and I could smell soap and aftershave, could see how carefully he had groomed himself. Do you know how many patients like Mr. Jones are in facilities like this? How many people trapped inside their own bodies, aware but unable to communicate? Hundreds, thousands, all of them completely helpless, all of them completely vulnerable. He paused. The hospitals are even worse. Night shifts in understaffed wards, where nobody checks on patients for hours at a time. Where monitors fail and medications get mixed up, and people die in their beds while nurses fill out paperwork 3 floors away. Why are you telling me this? My voice was barely a whisper. Because you cannot prove anything. Because dementia patients are not reliable witnesses. Because I am just a confused old man who sometimes says strange things in the middle of the night. He leaned in close enough that I could feel his breath on my face. And because I want you to know that this is not the first time. It will not be the last time. There are people like me in facilities all over this country, hiding behind diagnoses and medications and the assumption that we are too mentally impaired to plan, to hunt, to enjoy what we do. He straightened and walked past me down the hallway, back toward his room. Sweet dreams, nurse. I submitted my resignation the next morning. I told the director I was moving out of state for family reasons. I could not tell her the truth. Who would believe me? I had no proof, no evidence, nothing but my own certainty that Mr. Owens was exactly what he appeared to be, a predator who had found the perfect hunting ground. That was 3 years ago. I work in pediatrics now, in a fully staffed hospital with security cameras everywhere and strict protocols for patient safety. But I still follow the news from that region, still scan the obituaries for names I might recognize. Mr. Owens is still at Grantham Assisted Living. He is still listed as a patient with Lewy body dementia and PTSD. He is still there, surrounded by vulnerable people who cannot speak, cannot move, cannot tell anyone what happens to them in the long hours between shifts. And sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, I think about all the other facilities like Grantham, all the understaffed nursing homes and memory care units and assisted living centers where residents die unexpectedly and nobody questions it too closely because death is expected in such places. I think about locked-in syndrome and how many people might be suffering from it without anyone realizing. I think about how easy it would be for someone to hurt them, to torture them, to kill them slowly while they remained fully conscious, but completely unable to scream. I think about Mr. Jones and the words written on his wall. Still aware. I think about his eyes finding mine in those final moments, and what it must have been like to be trapped inside your own body, experiencing unspeakable horror while everyone around you assumed you felt nothing at all. The worst part is knowing that this could be happening right now, in facilities across the country. That there could be predators hiding in plain sight, protected by their own diagnoses, preying on the most vulnerable people in our society. That the victims cannot tell us what is happening to them. That nobody is listening to their silence. They say that dementia patients lose their awareness, that they slip away gradually until there is nothing left of the person they used to be. But what if that is not always true? What if some of them are still in there, still conscious, still terrified, trapped behind eyes that can no longer focus and mouths that can no longer form words? What if they are screaming on the inside, while we assume they are peaceful? I will never know for certain what happened to Mr. Jones, whether he truly had locked-in syndrome and suffered through every moment of his final days, or whether his dementia had progressed to the point where he felt nothing at all. I will never know if Mr. Owens was truly responsible for what happened that night, or if I simply convinced myself that a confused old man was a monster because I needed someone to blame for a tragedy I could not prevent. But I remember his eyes. Mr. Jones's eyes, finding mine at the end. The awareness in them. The plea. The relief when death finally came. And I remember Mr. Owens' smile. The clarity in his voice. The way he moved with purpose and precision. While everyone else dismissed him as just another dementia patient. Too impaired to be dangerous. Too confused to be held accountable. I do not work in memory care anymore. I do not think I ever will again. Some horrors are not supernatural. They are not ghosts or demons or things that go bump in the night. They are human. They are real. They are hiding in places we trust, wearing faces we pity, protected by the very vulnerability that makes them seem harmless. And they are waiting, patient and careful and completely aware. Always aware. If you or someone you love is in a care facility, please be vigilant. Visit often. Ask questions. Look for signs of neglect or abuse. The vast majority of healthcare workers are compassionate professionals who genuinely care about their patients. But The few who are not can do unimaginable damage in the shadows where nobody is watching. Trust your instincts. Document everything. And never assume that silence means comfort. Sometimes it means something far worse. Tonight, we explore what happens when isolation meets opportunity, when the roads we trust become hunting grounds, and when those sworn to protect us become our greatest threats. Let me tell you about John Chen and the night shift that destroyed his faith in humanity. I used to work as a funeral director and embalmer in a small town along Route 20 in Oregon. This happened 3 years ago, back in 2023. But I still think about it every single day. I still check my locks 3 times before bed. I still drive the long way home to avoid that stretch of highway. And I still wake up sometimes, convinced I can hear footsteps coming down the stairs. My name is John Chen. I am 32 years old now, but I was 29 when this started. I had been working at Riverside Funeral Home for about 6 months, still considered an apprentice despite my training. The main funeral home sat right off Route 20, about halfway between Sisters and Lebanon, Oregon. It was one of those old Victorian buildings that looked beautiful during the day but took on a different quality after dark, all sharp angles and deep shadows. The funeral industry is not what most people think. Yes, there is death, but there is also profound care, dignity, and respect for those who have passed. I chose this profession because I wanted to help families through their darkest moments. I never imagined I would become part of someone else's nightmare. It started on a Tuesday night in October. We had received a homicide victim earlier that day, a young woman named Sarah Mitchell, who had been found alongside Route 20 near Camp Sherman. She was only 24 years old, an immigrant from Canada who had been working at a gas station in Sisters. The police report said she had been jogging when someone grabbed her. They found her 3 days later in the woods, strangled and left like garbage among the pine needles. The embalming room felt different that day. I have prepared hundreds of bodies, but something about Sarah's case hung heavy in the air. Maybe it was the violence of her death. Maybe it was how young she was, how her whole life had been stolen from her on a morning run. The sadness in that room was almost physical, pressing down on my chest as I worked. I finished around 7 p.m. and went home, exhausted and emotionally drained. But at 11:30 that night, my phone rang. It was my supervisor, Peter, asking me to come back for a late-night removal. A family needed us to pick up their father from the hospital, and Peter was tied up with another call. Could I handle it alone? I said yes. I wish I had said no. The funeral home was completely dark when I arrived just after midnight. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the building's facade, making it look even more imposing than usual. I parked near the side entrance and sat in my car for a moment, gathering myself. The building looked different at night, almost watching, waiting. As I unlocked the side door and stepped inside, the familiar smell of formaldehyde and flowers greeted me. I flipped on the hallway lights and made my way to the office to grab the removal paperwork. That is when I heard it. Footsteps. Distinct, deliberate footsteps coming from the second floor, directly above my head. Then, the unmistakable creak of someone descending the main staircase. My heart rate spiked immediately. I pulled out my phone and texted Peter, asking if he had come back to the funeral home. His response came 30 seconds later. He was still 40 minutes away, stuck on the other side of Lebanon dealing with his removal. The footsteps continued down the stairs, slow and measured, like someone who belonged there. Like someone who knew exactly where they were going. I did what any rational person would do. I called out, asking who was there. My voice sounded thin and uncertain in the empty building. No response. Just the continued sound of footsteps reaching the bottom of the stairs, then silence. I should have left right then. I should have walked out that door and waited in my car for Peter. But I told myself I was being paranoid. That old buildings make noise, that my mind was playing tricks on me after a long, emotionally draining day. So I stayed. Peter arrived about 20 minutes later. We completed the removal together, picking up Mr. Johnson from Sacred Heart Hospital and bringing him back to the funeral home. The drive back was uneventful, just the two of us talking about normal things, work schedules, weekend plans. Peter left around 1:30 a.m., and I told him I would stay behind to finish some paperwork that needed to be submitted by morning. I was alone again. The administrative office was on the first floor, down a long hallway from the embalming room. I sat at the desk, trying to focus on intake forms and inventory reports, but my mind kept wandering back to those footsteps I had heard earlier. I kept glancing at the doorway, half expecting to see someone standing there. At 2:15 a.m., I decided I had done enough. I gathered my things and headed toward the side exit. To get there, I had to pass the main staircase. As I approached, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The embalming room light was on. I know, with absolute certainty, that I had turned that light off after we brought Mr. Johnson in. Peter had helped me transfer him to the cooler, and I distinctly remember flipping the switch as we left. But now, yellow light spilled out from under the embalming room door, and I could hear something inside. Sobbing. Gut-wrenching. Desperate sobbing, like someone drowning in grief. My hands started shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was frozen, staring at that closed door, listening to those broken sounds of anguish coming from the other side. Then came the banging. Loud, violent banging on the heavy industrial door from inside the embalming room. Boom, 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 someone trying to break through. The sobbing grew louder, more frantic, mixing with the pounding until I could not tell where one sound ended and another began. I ran. I sprinted down that hallway faster than I have ever moved in my life, crashed through the side door, and stumbled into the parking lot. My car was parked about 30 feet away, and I fumbled with my keys, dropping them twice before finally getting the door unlocked. As I threw myself into the driver's seat and jammed the key into the ignition, my backup sensor started beeping insistently. Something was behind my vehicle. I looked in the rearview mirror. There, illuminated by my taillights, stood a figure. It was not quite solid, not quite smoke. A black, human-shaped mass that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. It stood perfectly still, facing my car, and even though I could not see its face, I knew it was looking at me. I could feel its gaze, cold and penetrating and full of rage. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely shift into drive. I hit the gas and tore out of that parking lot, my tires squealing on the asphalt. In my mirror, I watched the figure just standing there. Not moving, not following, just watching me flee. I made it about 200 feet down the access road before I had to pull over. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I sat there with my hazard lights flashing, trying to control my breathing, trying to convince myself I had not just seen what I thought I saw. That is when I noticed the snow. It had started snowing while I was inside, just a light dusting, enough to leave a thin white coating on the road and surrounding grass. And in that snow, clearly visible in my headlights, was a single set of footprints. They started exactly where that figure had been standing behind my car. They led away from the parking lot, across the lawn directly to the embalming room's exterior brick wall. And there, they stopped. They did not go around the wall or away from it. They walked straight to it and vanished, as if whoever made them had simply walked through solid brick. I sat in my car until dawn, too terrified to drive home, too terrified to go back inside. When the morning shift arrived at 7 a.m., I was still parked on the side of the road, my hazard lights still flashing, though by then they were barely visible in the sunrise. My supervisor, Janet, found me there. She took one look at my face and knew something terrible had happened. I told her everything, the footsteps, The sobbing, the banging, the figure, the footprints in the snow. I expected her to think I was crazy, to tell me I was overworked and imagining things. Instead, she just nodded slowly and said, "That is the third time this month." Janet explained that ever since Sarah Mitchell's body had arrived, strange things had been happening at the funeral home. Staff members heard footsteps when no one else was there. The embalming room lights turned on by themselves, and several people had reported seeing a dark figure standing near the building late at night. She told me something else too, something that made my skin crawl. Sarah's case was not isolated. Over the past 15 years, at least 9 women had disappeared or been murdered along that stretch of Route 20. Most were young, most were alone, most were never found, or their cases went cold. Sarah was the first victim in 3 years, the first one since they had finally arrested a highway department worker named David Morrison for killing a jogger back in 1993. The police believed David had been responsible for multiple deaths, but they could only prove one murder. He died in prison in 2016, taking his secrets with him. How many victims? Where were the bodies? He never told. But Janet believed the deaths had not stopped when David was arrested. She believed someone else had continued his work. Someone who knew that stretch of highway just as well. Someone who had learned from David's mistakes. And she believed that Sarah Mitchell knew her killer. That she had trusted him enough to stop running when she saw his truck. That she had gotten into that vehicle willingly, never knowing it would be the last choice she ever made. I learned later that Sarah's family had been trying to get her body released so they could take her home to Ontario for burial. The paperwork was delayed, bureaucracy and jurisdiction issues, the usual complications that arise in murder cases. For 3 weeks, she had been waiting in our facility, unable to go home, unable to rest. I quit 2 days after that night. I could not go back to that building, could not walk those hallways, could not work in that embalming room knowing what I had heard, what I had seen. Some of my colleagues thought I was overreacting. Others understood completely. Sarah's body was finally released to her family 4 days after my incident. They held her funeral in Ontario, surrounded by people who loved her, far from the highway where she died. I like to think she is at rest now. I like to think that night was her way of making her presence known before she could finally leave. But I am not sure I believe that. Because 3 months after I quit, another young woman disappeared from Route 20. Her name was Jennifer Walsh, 26 years old, a graduate student from Eugene who was camping with friends near Sisters. She went for an early morning run and never came back. They found her car in the campground parking lot, her phone and wallet inside, her running shoes by the driver's seat as if she had taken them off after returning from her run. But Jennifer never returned to that campsite. No one saw her after 6:30 that morning. No one heard from her again. The search lasted 2 weeks, dozens of volunteers combing the forests and logging roads around Camp Sherman. They found nothing, not her body, not her clothes, not a single trace of where she had gone or what had happened to her. The case is still open. The police have no suspects, no leads, no evidence. Just another young woman who vanished along Route 20, swallowed by those dark forests and twisting roads, joining the growing list of women who will never come home. I think about Sarah Mitchell often. I think about that night at the funeral home, about those footsteps and that sobbing and that figure standing behind my car. I think about those footprints leading to the embalming room wall, about how desperate she must have been to make her presence known. And I think about Jennifer Walsh, about all the others whose names I do not know, whose bodies were never found, whose families still wait for answers that may never come. Route 20 is beautiful during the day, all towering pines and mountain vistas and small town charm. But at night, it transforms into something else entirely. Miles of empty road cutting through dense forest, countless logging trails disappearing into darkness, dozens of isolated spots where someone could vanish without a trace. The highway department still maintains that stretch of road. Workers drive it every day, alone in their trucks, with perfect knowledge of every turnoff, every abandoned logging road, every hidden spot where the forest grows thick enough to hide terrible secrets. I drive a different route now when I need to travel through Central Oregon. I take the long way, adding an extra hour to my trip, just to avoid Route 20. I tell myself it is paranoia, that I am letting fear control me, that I am being irrational. But, late at night, when I am alone, I remember that figure standing behind my car. I remember how it felt to be watched by something that should not exist. I remember those footprints leading nowhere. And I remember that somewhere along Route 20, someone is still out there. Someone who has learned how to hunt without leaving evidence. Someone who knows that highway like the back of his hand. Someone who understands that in those vast, empty forests, screams do not carry far, and bodies can stay hidden for decades. Sarah made her presence known that night because she could not rest, because her death demanded to be acknowledged, because someone needed to witness her rage and grief. I was that witness. And now, I am telling you, if you ever find yourself driving Route 20 late at night, if you ever see someone broken down on the side of the road, if someone in a truck offers you a ride, remember Sarah Mitchell. Remember Jennifer Walsh. Remember all the women who trusted the wrong person on that lonely highway and paid with their lives. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Tell someone where you are going. Because the scariest monsters are not the ones we imagine. They are not ghosts or demons or supernatural entities. They are the humans who drive past us every day, who work normal jobs, who blend into society so well that no one suspects the darkness they carry inside. They are the ones who see isolated women as opportunities rather than people. The ones who understand that a moment of vulnerability is all they need. The ones who have learned, through practice and repetition, exactly how to make someone disappear. I survived my encounter with whatever haunted that funeral home. Sarah Mitchell was not trying to hurt me that night. She was trying to be heard. But I cannot stop thinking about the women who encountered something far more terrifying on Route 20, the living predator who wore a friendly face, who offered help when they needed it most, who turned their trust into terror. Those women did not survive. And their stories, the ones we will never fully know, haunt me far more than any ghost ever could. The worst part is knowing that somewhere out there, he is still driving that highway. Still watching. Still waiting for his next opportunity. Still hunting. What happens when the places we think are safe become haunted by something we cannot explain? Now, let me tell you about Gary Mitchell and the school that should have stayed empty after dark. I am a 43-year-old man who has worked as a janitor and substitute teacher at Lincoln Middle High School in Michigan for the past 7 years. I am not the type to believe in ghosts or supernatural nonsense. I grew up practical, blue-collar, the kind of guy who fixes things instead of wondering about them. But what happened to me over the course of 3 months last year made me question everything I thought I knew about the building I clean 5 nights a week. This story is true. I have told it to exactly 4 people, and 3 of them laughed. The 4th, my friend Dennis, went pale and told me to look something up. What I found confirmed that I was not the first person to experience what I am about to describe. It started in late September, during my usual nighttime cleaning shift. I work from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, alone in a building that holds nearly 800 students during the day, but becomes a tomb of echoing hallways once the sun goes down. The school is old, built in 1962, all brick and concrete, and that particular smell of floor wax and old textbooks that never quite goes away. That first night I was finishing up the main hallway on the 2nd floor when I heard it. Basketball sounds. The unmistakable squeak of sneakers on a gymnasium floor. The rhythmic bounce of a ball. Shouting, cheering, the whole atmosphere of a game in progress. It was coming from the gym at the far end of the building, I stopped pushing my cart and listened. The sounds were clear, distinct, impossibly loud for 10:30 at night in a locked building. My first thought was that some kids had broken in, that I was about to have to call the police and deal with a bunch of teenagers who thought it would be fun to play basketball after hours. I was annoyed more than anything else. I walked down the hallway toward the gym, my keys jangling at my belt. The closer I got, the louder the sounds became. I could hear individual voices now, kids yelling "pass it" and "over here," the sharp tweet of a referee's whistle, the thunder of feet running up and down the court. It sounded like a packed game, like the whole school had shown up to watch. I reached the gym doors. The sounds were deafening now, like I was standing right at courtside. I grabbed the door handle, braced myself to yell at whatever kids were inside, and pulled it open. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. The gym was empty. Dark. The overhead lights were off, just the dim red glow of the exit signs casting long shadows across the polished floor. No kids. No basketball. No referee. Nothing. I stood there in the doorway for a full minute, my hand still on the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The silence felt heavy, oppressive, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I flipped on the lights. The fluorescents buzzed and flickered to life, illuminating every corner of the gym. Empty. Completely empty. I told myself I had imagined it. Acoustics in old buildings do strange things. Maybe the heating system was making noise. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. I went about my cleaning, swept the gym floor, emptied the trash cans near the bleachers, collected a few empty soda cans some student had left behind during the day. I dumped them in my cart and headed to the girls' locker room to finish up in there. The locker room took me about 20 minutes. When I came back out into the gym, I froze in the doorway. The soda cans I had just thrown away were lined up on the basketball court. Not scattered. Not knocked over. Lined up, perfectly, in a neat circle along the Spartan logo at center court. 6 cans. Evenly spaced. Deliberately arranged. I was alone in the building. I had checked every door when I arrived, as I always do. Every entrance was locked. Every window was secure. There was no way anyone could have gotten in. And yet someone, or something, had taken those cans out of my trash and arranged them on the floor. I did not sleep well that night. The next incident happened 2 weeks later. I had managed to convince myself that someone was messing with me, that maybe another staff member had a key and was playing a prank. I was cleaning the music hallway on the first floor when I heard it. Piano music. Not a recording. Live piano. Someone actually playing. The keys depressing with weight and intention. The music room was 3 doors down. The door was closed, but I could hear the melody clearly. It was an old song, something slow and melancholic that I did not recognize. My hands were shaking as I approached the door. I knocked. The music stopped immediately. I waited. No footsteps. No voice. Nothing. I opened the door. The music room was dark. I flipped on the light. The piano sat in the corner, lid closed, bench pushed in. I walked over to it and lifted the lid. The keys were dusty. No one had played this piano in days, maybe weeks. I closed the lid and turned to leave. That is when the music started again. I spun around. The piano lid was still closed. The bench was still pushed in. But I could hear it, clear as day, the same melancholic tune playing from inside the closed instrument. I watched the lid, waiting for it to move, waiting for some logical explanation. It never came. The music just played, impossibly, from a piano that should have been silent. I left the room and shut the door. The music stopped the moment the latch clicked. Over the next month, the incidents escalated. I started keeping a notebook, documenting everything that happened. I wanted proof, evidence that I was not losing my mind. October 15th. Heard the basketball game again. This time I recorded it on my phone. When I played back the recording, there was nothing. Just silence and the sound of my own breathing. October 22nd. Found wet footprints leading from the pool to the main hallway. The pool had been drained for maintenance 2 weeks prior. There was no water in the building. November 3rd. All the lockers on the 3rd floor were open when I arrived for my shift. Every single one. 247 lockers, all standing open like mouths waiting to be fed. It took me an hour to close them all. When I came back through an hour later to check, one locker was open again. Number 117. I closed it. When I checked again before I left at 6 in the morning, it was open again. November 9th. I was cleaning the chemistry lab when I heard knocking. 3 sharp knocks, coming from inside the supply closet. I opened it. Empty. Just shelves of beakers and chemicals. I closed it. 3 more knocks. I opened it again. Still empty. This went on for 10 minutes, until I finally just left the room. I started to dread going to work. Every night felt like walking into a place that was actively aware of me, that was watching, waiting, testing. But I needed the job. I have a mortgage, a car payment, a life that requires a paycheck. So I kept going. The worst night was November 17th. I was cleaning the boys' locker room around midnight when I heard my name. Not shouted, not whispered, just spoken, clear and calm, like someone was standing right behind me. Gary. I turned around. No one there. Gary. It came from the showers. I walked slowly toward the tiled area, my footsteps echoing. The showers were empty, but I could hear breathing now. Slow and steady, like someone was standing just out of sight. Gary. I ran. I am not ashamed to admit it. I grabbed my cart, and I ran out of that locker room, and I did not stop until I was in the parking lot, hands on my knees, gasping for air under the yellow glow of the security lights. I called Dennis the next day. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long time. You need to look something up, he finally said. There is a book called Michigan Ghost Stories, Volume 3. Check page 84. I found the book at the library. Page 84 told the story of a janitor named Robert Halloway, who worked at a school in northern Michigan in the 1970s. He reported hearing phantom basketball games, piano music playing from empty rooms, and his name being called in the hallways. He quit after 6 months. The school burned down in 1981 under suspicious circumstances. The school described in the book was not Lincoln Middle High, but the experiences were identical. I still work at Lincoln. I still hear things. The basketball games happen about once a month now. The piano plays every few weeks. Locker 117 opens on its own regularly. I have learned to coexist with whatever is in that building. I finish my cleaning. I do not investigate strange sounds. And I leave at 6 in the morning when the sun is starting to rise. But I will never go into the boys' locker room after midnight again. And I will never, ever answer when I hear my name called in an empty hallway. Because the thing that calls my name is still there, patient and waiting in the dark corners of a school that is never truly empty. I'm sharing this because I want people to understand that some places hold on to things. Events, emotions, presences that do not leave when the living do. Lincoln Middle High is one of those places. And if you ever find yourself working alone in an old building at night, and you hear sounds that should not be there, do yourself a favor. Do not investigate. Just finish your work and leave. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be survived. What happens when the places we care for hold memories we were never meant to witness? Now let me tell you about Sarah Mitchell, and the night she learned that some memories refuse to stay buried. I am a home caregiver in Louisville, Kentucky. I have been doing this work for 6 years now, and I have seen a lot in that time. Seen people at their most vulnerable, their most afraid. I've held hands as they took their last breath, cleaned wounds that would never heal, listened to stories that would die with the teller. But what happened with my client, Eleanor Vance, changed something fundamental in how I understand the world. Changed what I believe is possible. This happened 8 months ago, but I still cannot sleep without checking the bathroom sink 3 times before bed. Still cannot hear running water without my heart rate spiking. Still cannot shake the feeling that I brought something back with me from Eleanor's room that night. Something that refuses to leave. Let me start at the beginning. I was assigned to Eleanor in late September of last year. She was 73 years old, final stage liver failure due to chronic alcoholism, and she was dying. The agency called her a stopgap client, which is what they say when you are just keeping someone comfortable until hospice takes over or they pass away. My job was simple. Visit 3 days a week, prepare meals, do light cleaning, make sure she took her medications, and provide companionship. Eleanor lived alone in a converted carriage house behind a Victorian mansion in Old Louisville. The building had been renovated sometime in the 1980s, but you could still see the bones of the original structure. Stone foundation, thick walls, narrow windows set deep into the masonry. The kind of place that stays cold, even in summer, that never quite feels like it belongs to the living. The first time I met Eleanor, she was sitting in her recliner by the window, looking out at the main house. She was small, bird-boned, with papery skin that bruised if you looked at it wrong. But her eyes were sharp, aware. She watched me unpack my supplies with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "You feel it, do you not?" she said after a few minutes of silence. "Feel what, Miss Vance?" "The cold, the weight." She gestured vaguely at the walls. "This place remembers things. Bad things." I had heard this before. Dying patients often became fixated on their surroundings, reading meaning into ordinary discomfort. The carriage house was poorly insulated. That explained the cold. The weight she felt was probably anxiety, depression, the crushing awareness of approaching death. "The heating system is a bit old," I said gently, "but we can get you another blanket if you are cold." She smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You will see. They always do, eventually. The ones who stay long enough." I did not pay much attention to that conversation. Not then. The first few visits were routine. Eleanor was quiet, polite, asked very little of me. She rarely spoke about her past, and when she did, the details were vague, disconnected. She had lived in Louisville her whole life. Never married. Worked as a librarian until her health declined. She drank to forget, she told me once, but would not say what. It was during my 4th visit that I started noticing the water. I just finished folding towels in the hallway when I heard it. Running water, coming from the bathroom. I had not turned on any faucets. Eleanor was asleep in her chair in the living room. I walked to the bathroom and pushed open the door. The sink was running. Not a trickle, but a full stream, splashing loudly into the basin. I reached out and turned off the tap, frowning. Old plumbing, I told myself. Worn washers. Happens all the time. But when I returned to check on Eleanor, she was awake, watching me with those sharp, knowing eyes. "You heard it," she said. It was not a question. The sink was running. Probably just loose valve. It was Larry. I paused in the doorway. "Who is Larry?" "The man who follows me. Has been following me for 3 years now. Everywhere I go, he finds me." She spoke matter-of-factly, the way you might describe a chronic illness. "He drowned, you see, in Kensington Lake, back in 2018. His wife held him under until he stopped fighting. Now he cannot seem to let go of the water. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This was delusion, clearly. Grief hallucinations, maybe early dementia on top of the liver failure. I had seen it before, but the certainty in her voice unsettled me. Miss Vance, there is no one else in the house. The doors are all locked. He does not need doors. She turned back to the window. He will show himself to you eventually. He always does. That is why I keep having to move. People see him, they think I am crazy, they stop coming. But he follows me anyway. I think he is waiting for me to die. Wants the company, maybe. I finished my shift quickly that day. Told myself it was just the ramblings of a sick, frightened woman. But I found myself checking the bathroom 3 more times before I left. The faucet stayed off. For the next 2 weeks, everything was normal. Eleanor seemed more alert, even managed to eat full meals on occasion. We fell into an easy routine. I would arrive at 2 in the afternoon, prepare her dinner, sit with her while she ate, clean up, then spend the last hour just talking. She told me about books she had loved, places she wished she had traveled to. Small regrets that seem enormous when you are running out of time to correct them. She never mentioned Larry again. I almost forgot about that strange conversation. Then came the night of October 23rd. I was running late. My previous client's appointment had gone long, and by the time I arrived at Eleanor's carriage house, it was nearly 7 in the evening. The sun had set, and the temperature had dropped sharply. My breath fogged in the cold air as I unlocked the door. The house was silent. No television, no lights except for a single lamp in the living room. I called out as I entered, listening for Eleanor's response. Nothing. I found her in her bedroom, awake but unresponsive. Her eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, and she was breathing in short, rapid gasps. Pneumonia, I realized. It had probably been coming on for days, and in her weakened state, it was progressing fast. I called 911, then her hospice nurse, then settled in to wait. Eleanor's hand was cold in mine, her pulse thready and weak. I kept talking to her, telling her help was coming, that she was not alone. I am not sure if she heard me. That is when I heard the water. It was louder this time, not just the sink, but multiple sources. The bathroom, the kitchen, maybe even outside. A constant, rushing sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I looked toward the bedroom door, then back at Eleanor. Her eyes had shifted, focusing on something behind me. "He is here," she whispered. Her voice was so faint I barely heard it over the water. "He has been waiting." I turned. The doorway was empty, but the hallway beyond was dark, darker than it should have been. And in that darkness, I saw something move. A shape. Tall, broad-shouldered, shambling slowly toward the bedroom. As it passed under the hallway light, I saw it clearly for the first time. It looked like a man. The outline was human, but the substance was all wrong. It was made of water and rot, of decomposing matter held together by something that was not physics. I saw dark mud running through with pale, writhing things. I saw bits of trash and leaves stuck to what should have been skin. I saw broken glass where eyes should be, glowing with a dim, sickly light. And when it opened its mouth, I saw rows of long, thin teeth that glinted silver in the lamplight. Hypodermic needles. The smell hit me next. Stagnant water, algae, decay. The smell of drowning, of lungs filled with lake water, of a body left too long in the dark. "Do you have something to offer?" The voice was deep, resonant, like wind through a tunnel. Like drowning, I could not move, could not speak. Every muscle in my body had locked up, some primal instinct screaming at me to stay still, to not draw attention, to wait until the predator moved on. Eleanor's hand tightened weakly on mine. The thing stepped into the room. Water dripped from it with each movement, leaving dark, spreading stains on the hardwood floor. It moved around the bed slowly, deliberately, until it was standing directly beside Eleanor, looking down at her with those terrible glass eyes. "You are almost ready," it said to her, almost gently. "Not much longer now." Eleanor nodded weakly. There were tears running down her face. "I know." It reached out with one hand, fingers trailing through the air above her forehead. Wherever its hand passed, the temperature dropped. I could see Eleanor's breath now, misting in the sudden cold. She was shaking, gasping, her lips turning blue. "No." The word came out of me before I realized I was speaking. "No, you need to leave her alone." The thing turned its head toward me. Slowly. Considering. Those broken glass eyes fixed on me with an intelligence that was utterly inhuman, and completely aware. "Do you have something to offer?" it repeated. I realized I was still holding Eleanor's hand. My right hand. I looked down at it, at the way my fingers were intertwined with hers, at the IV line still attached to her wrist from an earlier nurse visit. My hand. My arm. My choice. "No," I said again. But my voice was weaker this time. The thing smiled. Those silver teeth glinted. It leaned closer to Eleanor, opening its mouth wide, and I saw that terrible darkness inside. Saw more teeth lining its throat. Saw something moving in there that might have been a tongue, or might have been eels, or might have been something else entirely. I do not remember making the decision. I just remember suddenly being on my feet, my hand released from Eleanor's grip, backing toward the door. The thing's head snapped up, tracking my movement. For a moment, we stared at each other. Then it took a step toward me. I ran. I made it to the hallway before I felt the cold. It was like being plunged into ice water, that sudden, shocking cold that steals your breath and stops your heart. My legs went numb. I stumbled, caught myself against the wall, kept moving. The bathroom was ahead, door open, and I could see water overflowing from the sink, pouring onto the floor, running in streams toward the hallway. Behind me, I heard wet footsteps. Slow, patient, following. I reached the bathroom doorway and looked back. The thing was there, filling the hallway, its shape seeming to expand in the darkness. It raised one hand, and I saw something in its grip. A bundle of fabric, soaking wet, wrapped around something small and heavy. Eleanor's file had mentioned she was a librarian. Never married. But it had not mentioned children. Had not mentioned anything about a family. And I realized in that moment of terrible clarity what Eleanor had been drinking to forget. Realized why Larry the drowned man had been following her for 3 years. Realized what debt she owed that death would not forgive. "She is coming with me," the thing said. Its voice was final. Absolute. She has always been coming with me. Since the day she held me under. Since the day she decided my life was worth less than her secret. I wanted to ask what it meant. Wanted to understand. But then I heard the sirens outside, heard car doors slamming, heard voices calling Eleanor's name. The paramedics had arrived. The hospice nurse. "Help!" The thing's head turned toward the sound, then back to me. It stepped closer, and I felt that terrible cold intensify. Felt ice forming on my skin, my breath crystallizing in the air. Felt something reaching for me, trying to pull me down into dark water, into drowning, into the space where Larry lived now. Then Kate's voice cut through everything. "Sarah? Sarah, where are you?" Kate was my assistant, assigned to shadow me on some shifts. She had been running late, had just arrived. Her flashlight beam swept the hallway, and for just a moment, it passed directly through the thing standing in front of me. It screamed. Not with sound, but with cold. The temperature dropped so fast that ice crystallized on every surface, frost spreading across the walls and ceiling in fractal patterns. The water on the floor froze solid. And then the thing was gone. Just gone. The hallway was empty. I stood there, shaking, staring at the space where it had been. Kate grabbed my arm, saying my name, asking if I was okay, asking what happened. I could not answer, could not explain. The paramedics took Eleanor to the hospital. She died 2 days later without regaining consciousness. Pneumonia, they said. Organ failure. Expected complications for someone in her condition. No autopsy needed. I found the newspaper article a week after the funeral. I was not looking for it. I was not even thinking about Larry anymore, or at least I was trying not to. But I was at the library, returning some books, and I saw the local history section, saw the microfiche archives, and something pulled me toward them. Kensington Lake, 2018. Drowning. Homicide. Lawrence Eisenberg, 42 years old, found drowned in Kensington Lake on March 14, 2018. His wife, Eleanor Vance Eisenberg, reported him missing after he failed to return from a late-night walk. His body was recovered 3 days later. Initial investigation ruled it accidental drowning. But then a witness came forward. A neighbor who had seen 2 people walking toward the lake that night. Seen them arguing. Seen one person return alone. Eleanor was arrested, charged with second-degree murder. But the case fell apart. Lack of physical evidence, conflicting witness statements, Eleanor's own health issues raising questions about her fitness for trial. The charges were eventually dropped. Eleanor filed for divorce posthumously, reclaimed her maiden name, and moved from her home in St. Matthews to the carriage house in Old Louisville. 3 years ago. Exactly 3 years before I met her. I have thought about that night every single day since. Thought about what I saw, what it meant, whether any of it was real. I have researched stone tape theory, the idea that buildings can record traumatic events and play them back like a tape recorder. I have read about residual hauntings, about how strong emotions can leave impressions on physical spaces. I have read about grief hallucinations, about how the dying brain can create elaborate delusions. None of it explains what I saw. None of it explains the ice on the walls, the water on the floor, the way Kate's flashlight passed through solid matter. None of it explains why I can still smell stagnant lake water sometimes when I close my eyes. I do not work in home care anymore. I could not go back. Could not walk into another dying person's space knowing what I know now. Knowing that death is not always peaceful. That sometimes the people we hurt in life refuse to let us go in death. That sometimes justice requires more than a courtroom. The carriage house is empty now. Eleanor's distant cousin inherited it, tried to rent it out, but tenants never stay more than a few weeks. They complain about the cold, about water running when no one turned on the taps, about dreams of drowning, of being held under, of desperate hands clawing for air that never comes. I wonder sometimes if Larry is still there, still waiting, still holding on to his anger, his betrayal, his terrible need for acknowledgement. I wonder if he will ever let go. If he even can. I wonder what Eleanor sees now, wherever she is. I wonder if she is with him. If he finally got what he wanted. I wonder if I should have offered something that night. Should have given him my hand when he asked. Would that have been enough? Would that have satisfied him? Allowed him to move on? Or would I just be another drowned thing now, following someone else through their final days, waiting for my own impossible justice? I do not know. I will never know. But I know this. I know that some deaths cannot be escaped, cannot be drunk away, moved away from, hidden from. I know that water remembers, that stone remembers, that the places where terrible things happen hold on to those memories with a grip stronger than death. And I know that when you work with the dying, You need to be very, very careful. Because sometimes, what is waiting for them is not peaceful rest. Sometimes, it is something that drowned in dark water 6 years ago, and has been searching ever since for the person who held it under. Sometimes, the dead do not forget. They never forget. If you survived this story, consider hitting that subscribe button. These tales of true horror, and the spaces that remember them, are what I bring you each week. Stay safe out there. And the next time you hear water running when you know all the taps are off, maybe just leave the building. Some mysteries are not worth solving. Some questions should stay unanswered. Some doors should stay closed.